Hi there, this is Salzano Custom Concrete. Thanks for joining in another one of our informational videos. This is part of a series we're doing on cracks in concrete. This is part 3. If you haven't seen the other 2 parts, you can find those on YouTube as well. The topic of this one, still about concrete cracking, but what we want to talk about on this one is the age of the concrete. I get a lot of people that say that seem to think that the age of the concrete has something to do with the cracks that occur. In other words, people all the time say, well, you know, I assume that I'd get a couple of years before we'd see any cracking, and unfortunately that's just not true. I'm not sure where that ever came from, but you know, if I've heard it once, I've heard it a million times, where people don't understand that concrete cracks early. Cracking typically is part of the curing cycle of concrete, really has nothing to do with time. Now, that said, there are things that can make concrete crack over time, but usually something somewhat unrelated, like a tree root, for example, or maybe some unusual settlement. But the cracks that we normally see are ones associated more with the curing cycle, which is really in the first 30 days. So I tell customers all the time, you know, not out of the question that within the first 30 days, you can see a hairline crack, but again, if you watch the part 1, part 2 of our videos, the cracks 95% of the time is the number that we use, will not be visible. They're in these control joints. But what I want to show you here, this is a brand new neighborhood. If you look around here, there's still construction going on. I think this pool is brand new. I'm not even sure it's open yet. But anyway, this whole area, this whole neighborhood is probably a year or so old. And this concrete that I'm standing on here is probably about that. Maybe it's a year old, if that. But anyway, this is exactly the same. The video from the one of part 1, that concrete was probably 15 years old, but the concept here is identical. As you can see, concrete cracks, number 1 rule, 100%. Concrete cracks. Number 2, we want the crack to occur in the control joints. As you walk down, same thing we did in the other video, you see here, there's a crack down in the control joint. This worked exactly by design. You know, what's the irony of this is, you know, customers that have a crack that's in a control joint just like this one, you know, will never once call about a repair. Never once have I gotten that call, you know, hey, I got a crack down in the control joint. I'm worried about water getting in it. I'm worried about it getting worse. Never once. Kind of out of sight, out of mind, I guess. But if this same crack were to, you know, have occurred over here in the midst of the concrete, of course, that's where people get concerned, worried about water getting in there, worried about it getting worse. You know, but that same exact crack tucked down neatly in a control joint, you know, out of sight, out of mind, never once a phone call. So here again, there's another one right there. So this is just how it works. You know, there's no magic here. This is a technique that's literally been around for 100 years. There's another one right there. So in stamped concrete, this concept is identical, but typically those joints are cut with a saw. They're skinnier, they're the width of a saw blade. These grooves that you see here in a typical sidewalk are put in when the concrete's wet with a tool. Kind of looks like an iron, sort of, with a handle on one side and a fin on the back of the other side, and that fin is pushed through the concrete to create this groove, which creates a weak spot. So the concrete will take the path of least resistance when the crack starts to occur, and that crack will occur down in that joint. So here we've walked down 30 or 40 feet of concrete, and we've seen now in probably 4 of these joints, there's another one, hairline cracks at the base, but you don't see cracks anywhere else. So if we turn around and look down the sidewalk, oh, look at this beautiful concrete, not a crack anywhere. Well, not really. It's got a crack about every 6 or 8 feet, but tucked neatly down in these joints where you don't see them, and that's a success. It's exactly the way it's supposed to work. And here again, we're talking about the timing, right? So the timing here is irrelevant from my perspective. You know, this can happen in the first 30 days, can happen literally in the first day, the first 24 hours, 48 hours. So the fact that this concrete is, you know, probably less than a year old, exact same thing. The cracks already occurred. They occurred early. The one in the video from part 1, that concrete was 15 or 20 years old, looked identical to this in terms of cracks. You really didn't see any cracks at all looking down the section, but you did as you looked in the control joints. So anyway, that's it for part 3. Again, this is Salzano Custom Concrete. Thanks for watching another informational video, this one on concrete cracking with respect to the age of the concrete. Thanks again.